Dear student, the topic of this video is acidification of the urine and renal handling of acid. Learning objectives. At the end of the session, the students will be able to outline the processes involved in the secretion of H plus into the tubules, discuss the significance of these processes in the regulation of acid-base balance, define acidosis, alkalosis and give the normal, mean and range of H plus concentrations in blood that are compatible with health, list the principal buffers in blood, interstitial fluid and intracellular fluid, and using the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, describe what is unique about the bicarbonate buffer system. Describe the changes in blood chemistry that occur during development of metabolic acidosis and metabolic alkalosis and the respiratory and renal compensations for these conditions. Describe the changes in blood chemistry that occur during the development of respiratory acidosis and respiratory alkalosis and the renal compensation for these conditions. Renal handling of acids. Large number of bicarbonates are filtered continuously into the tubule. We can see here, so different areas here we are showing where there is filtration and reabsorption of different solutes. So large number of bicarbonate are filtered, and if they are excreted in the urine, suppose this amount of bicarbonate it is secreted here and it is not reabsorbed, so it will pass through the urine, so there will be loss of bicarbonate, removal of bicarbonate, so there will be removal of base from the blood, so there will be secretion of base into the urine. Similarly, large number of H plus are also secreted into the tubular rumen by the tubular epithelial cells, so thus removing acid from the blood. If more H plus secreted, normally what happens, there will be equal amount of H plus and HCO3 minus will be released into the tubular fluid. The amount filtered, that is the filtered amount of bicarbonate, will be almost equal to the secreted amount of H plus. So they will neutralize each other. But if more H plus is secreted than amount of bicarbonate that is filtered, then there will be net loss of acid. Conversely, if more HCO3 minus is filtered than H plus secreted, there will be net loss of base. So there must be a balance between the filtered bicarbonate and the secreted H plus. If filtered bicarbonate is more, then their loss will be more, so there will be loss of base from the body. If secreted H plus is more than the bicarbonate, so there will be more H plus loss, so there will be more loss of acid from the body. Each day, the body produces about 80 milliequivalent of non-volatile acids, mainly from the metabolism of proteins. These acids are called non-volatile because they are not the carbonic acid and therefore cannot be excreted by lungs. For example, they may be the keto acids, they may be the lactic acids, but they are not the carbonic acids, because carbonic acid, when converted into H2 and carbon dioxide, can be excreted out via lung. The primary mechanism for the removal of these acids from the body is renal excretion. Both the reabsorption of HCO3 minus and excretion of H plus are accomplished through the process of H plus secretion by the tubules. Each day, 4320 milliequivalent of HCO3 minus is filtered. So we know that the GFR, it is around 180 liter per day, and the amount of HCO3 minus, it is 24 milliequivalent per liter. So in total amount that is filtered in a day is 4320 milliequivalent. Okay, so this amount of this bicarbonate is very much necessary in our body because it is a primary buffer system of extracellular fluid. So it is not desirable that there will be loss of bicarbonate through the urine. So the kidney will try to prevent the loss of bicarbonate in the urine. It will try to reabsorb it, and it is seen that almost all the filtered bicarbonate will be reabsorbed from the tubule. So now what is the mechanism of reabsorption of this bicarbonate? In order to be reabsorbed, so this is the lumen of the tubule, so and this is the tubular cell. So this surface is the apical or luminal surface, this surface is the basolateral surface, it is the interstitial fluid, and this is a capillary. Okay, so within the lumen this is your filtered bicarbonate. Now how we can enhance the reabsorption of this bicarbonate? So when this HCO3 minus it reacts with the H plus that is secreted by the tubular cell, it will form the H2CO3. With the help of carbonic anhydrase enzyme, it will be converted to CO2, and this CO2 will enter within the cell. So the HCO3 minus must react with a secreted H plus to form H2CO3 and to get reabsorbed. So this secretion of H plus, it is important. So we know that the total amount of HCO3 minus that is filtered is 4320 milliequivalent per day. So in order to reabsorb this whole amount of bicarbonate, the tubular cell must secrete the same amount of H plus. So that is an amount secreted by the tubular H plus secreted by the tubular cell should be 4320 milliequivalent in order to neutralize the HCO3 minus. In addition to that, we know that 80 milliequivalent of non-volatile acids are generated due to metabolism. These are the non-volatile, they are non-bicarbonate, other acids. So they are to be secreted also, they are to be released and expelled out from the body. So 4320 milliequivalent for neutralizing the HCO3 minus, and additional 80 milliequivalent should be secreted, that is total 4320 plus this 80 milliequivalent, this total amount, it is around 4400 milliequivalent of H plus should be secreted into the tubule every day. Now when there may be conditions when there is reduced H plus in the body. What will happen then? Reduced H plus means there is alkalosis. That condition is alkalosis. So when we know that in order to neutralize the 4320 milliequivalent of bicarbonate, the tubular cells should release that equal amount of H plus. What if the H plus concentration is less in the extracellular fluid and the person is suffering from alkalosis? So in that case, the secreted H plus will be less. It cannot secrete. So what will happen then? The filtered bicarbonate, the total amount cannot be reabsorbed. So if the kidneys secrete less H plus, so they will fail to reabsorb all the filtered HCO3 minus. So there will be increased HCO3 minus excretion through the urine. So if the HCO3 minus it is lost in the urine, we know that, so in the blood their value will be less. In the blood this HCO3 minus, it causes buffers this H plus concentration. So if it is lost in the urine, so there will be adding, that means adding more H plus into the extracellular fluid. So that actually helps to restore this alkalosis condition. Alkalosis means less H plus, so we can increase the H plus concentration indirectly by increasing the loss of HCO3 minus through the urine. So therefore in alkalosis, the removal of HCO3 minus will increase the extracellular fluid H plus concentration and the pH will be back towards the normal. The opposite thing will again happen in case of acidosis. So in acidosis we know when there is increased extracellular fluid. So this is our cell within the cell we have the intracellular fluid, and this is our extracellular fluids, extracellular space, where if the H plus concentration is high, then it is acidosis. So in acidosis, the kidneys will secrete more amount of H plus, and the filtered HCO3 minus, in that case the filtered HCO3 minus will be inadequate to neutralize this excess amount of H plus. So this what will happen then? Then in addition to this, so there will be loss of H plus. In addition to that, there will be production of new HCO3 minus, which is added back to the extracellular fluid, which helps to neutralize the extracellular fluid H plus, and pH is restored. So when the alkalosis is there, so there will be bicarbonate loss. That will also help to restore the pH. When acidosis is there, so there will be H plus loss, as well as there will be formation of new bicarbonate, and that new bicarbonate will try to neutralize this excess amount of H plus in the extracellular fluid, and will try to restore the extracellular fluid pH. So now we want to know what are these mechanisms of excretion and new bicarbonate formation or renal handling of H plus and HCO3 minus. Now the kidneys regulate extracellular fluid H plus. So this extracellular fluid H plus, its regulation, its concentration will be regulated by three fundamental mechanisms. One, H plus secretion. One is a secretion of H plus. Second, reabsorption of filtered bicarbonate, and production of new bicarbonate. So three mechanisms by which the extracellular fluid H plus or the pH of extracellular fluid is maintained. One is the secretion of H plus, two is the reabsorption of filtered bicarbonate, three is the production of new bicarbonate. Among them, the secretion of H plus and reabsorption of filtered HCO3 minus, it is mostly done in the proximal convoluted tubule and the thick ascending loop of Fenley. Now we are considering how this H plus is handled by the early tubular segment, that is the proximal convoluted tubule. So H plus is secreted by the early tubular segment by the process of secondary active transport. That is very important. So what is that procedure? Now this is the proximal tubular cell. We can see here it is a proximal tubular cell. So this is the tubular lumen. So it is a lumen, and surrounding the lumen there are cells, and this is the side where the interstitial fluid, and this is the capillary side of the cell. So all these cells, they have two surfaces. One is the luminal or apical surface, another is the basolateral surface. Now the epithelial cells of the proximal tubule and the thick segment of ascending loop of Fenley, they secrete H plus into the tubular lumen via the Na plus H plus counter transport. You can see here the Na plus H plus. So this one is the Na plus H plus counter transport, and this is the example of secondary active transport. Now the secretory process begins when within the cell, we can see the secretory process begins when this carbon dioxide, it may be the carbon dioxide, either it is diffused into the tubular cell or it is formed by the metabolism in the tubular epithelial cell. This carbon dioxide, it will combine with the H2O with the influence of this carbonic anhydrase type 2. So to form the H2CO3. Now this H2CO3 will be dissociated into H plus and HCO3 minus. Now this H plus will be secreted from the cell into the tubular lumen via a sodium hydrogen counter transport or Na plus H plus exchanger. Na plus NHE3, Na plus H plus exchanger 3 NHE3. So this is an example of secondary active transport, by which we can see that H plus is moving outside the tubular cell, it is coming into the lumen, whereas in exchange to that the Na plus, it is entering within the tubular cell along its concentration gradients. It's moving down to the concentration gradient. How it is possible? If you look at the basolateral surface, you can see there is active functioning of this sodium potassium ATPase pump. The function of this pump is to remove 3 sodium and take 2 potassium. That means this pump, it is utilizing energy, and it is with that it is reducing the sodium concentration within the cell. Now at the luminal surface, that's why along the concentration gradient, as the intracellular sodium concentration has become less, so sodium will enter along its concentration gradient, so it will enter within the cell, and in exchange of sodium the H plus will be released. So this is an example of secondary active transport. It is an active transport because it requires energy, but it is secondary. That's why the energy is not required at the surface where actually the sodium reabsorption is taking place, but it is occurring at the basolateral surface where this sodium potassium ATPase pump is working. So we can say that the H plus that is secreted in the early tubular segment, it is via the secondary active transport with the help of this NHE or sodium hydrogen exchanger, NHE3. Now we know that this is the method by which H plus will be secreted. Now what will be the fate of this HCO3 minus? The HCO3 minus that is generated in the cell, it moves downhill across the basolateral membrane. So this is a basolateral membrane, downhill across the basolateral membrane into the renal interstitial fluid and then into the peritubular capillary blood. Now the transport of HCO3 minus across the basolateral membrane, it is facilitated by two mechanisms. In the proximal convoluted duct, it will be facilitated by it will be done by sodium bicarbonate co-transport. We can see that the sodium bicarbonate co-transport, both are entering into the interstitial space, whereas in the distal connecting tubule, we will see that it is done via chloride bicarbonate exchange. It is in the distal tubule. So we can see here it is the H plus, HCO3 minus, it will form the H plus, and it is the HCO3 minus. So this HCO3 minus, it is entering into the interstitial cell via HCO3 minus and Cl minus, that is the exchange mechanism. Whereas in proximal tubule, it will be done via the sodium bicarbonate co-transport. Now what will be the fate of the secreted H plus? The secreted H plus, it will readily combine with the filtered bicarbonate. This filtered bicarbonate, actually this filtered bicarbonate cannot enter within the cell directly without combining with the H plus. That's why it will readily bind with the H plus. It will form the H2CO3, and H2CO3 will form the H2O and CO2 with the help of another carbonic anhydrase, that is the luminal carbonic anhydrase type 4. And the carbon dioxide can move easily into the tubular cell. So from this it is clear that each time a H plus that is formed into the tubular epithelial cells, a HCO3 minus is also formed and it is released back into the blood. So with secretion of each H plus molecule, one HCO3 minus will be reabsorbed, will enter into the peritubular capillary blood. So the net effect is reabsorption of bicarbonate from the tubules. So, but one you can see that that the bicarbonate that is entering into the peritubular cell, peritubular blood, it is not the same bicarbonate that is filtered. Okay, but actually the effect is the reabsorption. Okay, so the filtered bicarbonate, maybe it is not the same with the that is entering into the peritubular cell, but with secretion of each H plus ion, one HCO3 minus reabsorption will be there. So in this way, the kidney can reabsorb the whole amount of filtered bicarbonate in the proximal tubule and also from the thick ascending loop of Henle and distal convoluted. It is seen that about 95% of bicarbonate or HCO3 minus ion is reabsorbed in this manner, requiring 4000 milliequivalent of H plus to be secreted each day by PCT. So we know the mechanism in the PCT, how the CO2 is combining with H2O, then H2CO3, then H plus plus HCO3 minus. H plus is coming out by the secondary active transport, and HCO3 minus is reabsorbing by the sodium bicarbonate co-transporter. So this mechanism is responsible for 95% of HCO3 minus reabsorption. But this mechanism, however, does not establish a very high H plus concentration in the tubular fluid. So urine acidity, it is not contributed by this mechanism. The tubular fluid becomes very acidic only in the collecting ducts. So the actual acidification mechanism that takes place in the collecting duct. So now we want to know how collecting duct is working to excrete the H plus, reabsorb the HCO3 minus and making the urine acidic. Now in the late distal part and the collecting tubule, so H plus secretion will occur through the intercalated cell. So now we have gone through the mechanism of H plus secretion at the proximal convoluted tubule and the thick ascending loop of Henle, where there is filtered bicarbonate. They have interacted with the secreted H plus, and this secretion of H plus happened via secondary active transport, and there is, if the filtered bicarbonate and secreted H plus, they are equal in amount, so there will be total reabsorption of bicarbonate. And we know the PCT has very little role in the in determination of pH of urine or acidification of urine. Mostly the acidification of urine will be determined by the late distal collecting duct and the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting tubule. So in the distal convoluted tubule, how actually these intercalated cells are secreting the H plus, that is our point of interest. In late distal tubule, the tubular epithelium secretes H plus via primary active transport. So one difference is already there. So in proximal tubule, this secretion of H plus, it was done by sodium hydrogen exchanger NHE3. That was an example of secondary active transport. But here it is not secondary, it is primary. So primary active transport of H plus occurs in the special type of this type A intercalated cells, and it is accomplished in two steps. First, the dissolved CO2, okay, it will combine with the H2O and it will form the H2CO3. This H2CO3 then second step dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus. Now this H plus is secreted in the tubular lumen by means of H2 ATPase or H plus K plus ATPase transporter, and for each H plus secreted, the one HCO3 minus, it will be reabsorbed. And what is the process of reabsorption? We have already told you, that is, it is the bicarbonate chloride exchanger. So both the secretion of H plus and the reabsorption of bicarbonate, the mechanism is different in the late distal convoluted tubule and in the collecting duct. So main difference is that H plus move across the luminal surface by an active H pump instead of any counter transport as occurs in proximal convoluted tubule. Now, although the secretion of H plus in the late DCT and the collecting duct accounts for only about 5% of the total H plus secreted, because most of the secretion was done at 4000 milliequivalent at the proximal convoluted tubule, but this mechanism is important in forming maximally acidic urine. In PCT, H plus concentration can be increased about 3 to 4 fold, and tubular fluid pH can be reduced to only 6.7, although large amounts of H plus are secreted by this nephron segment. However, H plus concentration can be increased as much as 900-fold in collecting tubules. So although the percentage of H plus secreted in these areas is only merely 5%, but the H plus concentration can be increased as much as 900-fold in the collecting tubule. This mechanism decreases the pH of tubular fluid up to 4.5. How much less? What is the range of pH? The lower range of pH of urine, it is 4.5, which is the lower limit of pH that can be achieved in normal kidney. This is known as the limiting pH, because below that the pH cannot be reduced. So this is the limiting pH. Now we want to know the mechanism of H plus that is secreted into the distal tubule and the collecting duct. What is the fate of this H plus and how it is making the tubular fluid acidic. The combination of the excess H plus with phosphate and ammonia buffers in the tubule generates new bicarbonate. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, we knew that the H plus that was secreted, it is almost equal to the filtered bicarbonate. So they will combine, and there will be reabsorption of bicarbonate, replenishment of the bicarbonate that was filtered. But here one new term is coming, that is a new bicarbonate. So when the H plus secreted, it is not combining with HCO3 minus, it is combining with other buffers like phosphate and ammonia buffers. Then there will be generation of new HCO3 minus. And what will be the fate of this H plus? So this is the thing we already know. So the carbon dioxide and H2O, H2CO3, H plus HCO3 minus, H plus when it is secreted into the tubular lumen, it will combine with the filtered HCO3 minus and the whole amount will be reabsorbed. Now the problem is, if there is more H plus secreted, so the amount of H plus that is equal to HCO3 minus, that will be reabsorbed, we know. But the excretion of, if the excretion of H plus, it is excess the amount of filtered HCO3 minus. As long as the HCO3 minus is greater than H plus, there is no problem, it will combine with H plus. Okay. So most of the secreted H plus will combine with HCO3 minus, it will be reabsorbed. But once all the HCO3 minus has been reabsorbed and there is no longer available, they are no longer available to combine with H plus, then what will happen to this excess H plus? Who will combine with them? So then for their support, we have two buffer system. One is the phosphate buffer, another is the ammonia buffer. So what will happen in case of phosphate buffer? We will see that the H plus, the secreted H plus, it will combine with the filtered H2PO4 minus, and it can be expressed as a sodium salt NaH2PO4, and it will be excreted out, carrying with it the excess H plus. Now there is one important difference in this sequence of H plus excretion from the previous one. So in this case, the HCO3 minus that is generated, so we know that this HCO3 CO2 is combining with the H2O to form H2CO3, then H plus and HCO3 minus. This H plus is secreted into the tubular lumen, but it is not combining with bicarbonate, and that is not coming in. It is not coming in, so it is going to be secreted out into the urine. So what will be the fate of this HCO3 minus? In this case, the HCO3 minus that is generated in the tubular cell and enters into the peritubular fluid, it represents a net gain of HCO3 minus by the blood rather than merely a replacement of filtered HCO3 minus. Therefore, whenever an H plus is secreted into the tubular lumen, it combines with a buffer other than HCO3 minus. Other than HCO3 minus, when the H plus combines, that will be formation of new HCO3 minus, new bicarbonate in the blood. This is how kidney replenishes the extracellular fluid store of HCO3 minus. So one important point is that H plus is secreted, but it is not combining with the bicarbonate buffer, it is combining with the phosphate buffer. But only 30 to 40 milliequivalent per day of phosphate is available for buffering the H plus at normal condition. So we know how much metabolized H plus is formed. It is 80 milliequivalent. So a phosphate is not alone, it is not sufficient. So much of the buffering it will occur via the ammonia buffer. So this ammonium ion, it is synthesized from the glutamine, which comes mainly from the metabolism of amino acids in the liver. The glutamine now it is delivered to kidney, and it is transported into the epithelial cell of proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule, thick ascending loop of Henle. Once inside the cell, this glutamine will be metabolized to form to generate the 2 ammonium ion and 2 bicarbonate ion. We can see here the glutamine first, with the help of glutaminase, it will be converted to glutamate, then glutamate dehydrogenase, it will form the alpha ketoglutarate, and when the glutamate is converted to alpha ketoglutarate, there is formation of ammonium NH4 plus ion. So from the glutamine there is generation of 2 NH4 plus and 2 HCO3 minus ion. Now this NH4 plus will be secreted into the tubular lumen via a counter transport mechanism in exchange of sodium. The sodium will be reabsorbed. So NH4 plus will be excreted out in exchange of sodium. Sodium reabsorption is there. And the bicarbonate is transported. It is transported across the basolateral membrane along with the peritubular capillary. Thus, for each molecule of glutamine metabolized in the proximal convoluted tubule or in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, the 2 NH4 plus is secreted into the urine and 2 HCO3 minus are reabsorbed into the blood. And the HCO3 minus generated by this process constitutes the new bicarbonate. Now this is the case of distal tubule. In case of collecting duct, this NH4 plus secretion procedure is a bit different. So in the collecting tubules, we can see, so this is the graph of the collecting tubule. So in the collecting tubules, the addition of NH4 plus is different. here you will see the collecting ducts are permeable to NH3. So this NH3, it will be easily diffused into the tubular lumen. But however, in the luminal membrane of this part of the tubule, it is much less permeable to NH4+. Therefore, once the H+ has reacted with the NH3 to form the NH4+, this NH4+ cannot re-enter into the tubular. NH4+, cannot re-enter into the cell. It will remain trapped into the tubular lumen and will be eliminated through the urine. So for each NH4+ secreted, one new bicarbonate will be reabsorbed, will be added to the blood. So here there will be entrapment or trapping of NH4+ because it is permeable to NH3, and when the NH3 is released, it will combine with H+ and H4+, and it will not be able to enter again into the tubular cell, so it will be excreted out, and for each molecule of NH4+, one new bicarbonate will be added to the blood. Now, how all these processes are regulated? So the H+ concentration, it is very precisely regulated in the body, because we know optimum pH is essential for the activities of almost all enzymes in the body, and changes in H+ alters virtually all cell and body functions, and we can see that our body pH is maintained within a very narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45, and beyond beyond this range it is fatal, beyond this range it is fatal. Okay, so it should be maintained within a very narrow range. And H+ concentration in our body, normally it is very less. We can see when the pH, neutral pH, that is pH is 7, it is the H+ concentration, it is, we can say, 10 to the power minus 7 mole. Very less amount of H+ that is present in our body. So we can say that as the H+ concentration is very small, so it is customary to express the H+ in a logarithmic scale, that is our pH. So at the neutral pH, we can neutral pH, that is pH is equal to 7. That means H+ concentration is 10 to the power 7 mole. So logarithm of 10 to the power minus 7 logarithm, if we take it, so we will get a pH value of 7. Okay, so very less amount of H+ concentration we can see here, and the normal H+ concentration, it is a 14 nano equivalent. It is nano equivalent per liter. It is expressed as a negative logarithm or pH, and normal pH range of extracellular fluid, it is around 7.36 to 7.44, and maintenance of normal pH level is essential for proper functioning of protein enzymes in our body. And what about the pH range of intracellular fluid? It is around 6 to 7.4. In the urine, it is around 4.5 to 8. Now the three primary systems, they regulate this H+ concentration. They maintain the pH within a very narrow range, because beyond excess and less, both will prove fatal in our system. So these three mechanisms are mainly responsible for maintenance of H+ concentration in our body. First is the chemical buffer system, which is the first line of defense and the quickest. If any alteration of H+ happen, this system will try to protect it. The second line of defense or intermediate action is the respiratory regulation. The respiratory buffer, it regulates the by removal of CO2 from the extracellular fluid, thereby there will be removal of H2CO3. Okay, so chemical buffer system, it immediately combines with acid or base to prevent the excessive change of H plus concentration. That is a property of buffer. Then second is respiratory system will try to exhale out the carbon dioxide or retain the carbon dioxide in order to restore the change of pH. And the third slowest but most powerful is the renal regulation. It can either excrete acid or base to readjust the extracellular fluid and H plus concentration. Buffer is a system that is a mixture of weak acid and its salt. For example, the bicarbonate buffer, H2CO3 is a weak acid, carbonic acid, and its salt in HCO3. So buffer actually, when some strong acid or strong base is added to a system, this buffer will try to neutralize it. For example, if we can see this is a bicarbonate buffer, when a strong acid HCl it is added to the system in this buffer system, so HCl will bind with the NaCO3 and it will form a weak acid H2CO3. So the pH of the system will not be affected much. Similarly, if a strong base NaOH is added, so H2CO3 will combine with it and it will convert it into a weak base, that is NaHCO3. So we can say that the buffer is any substance that can reversibly bind with H plus. So if this is buffer, it can reversibly bind with the H plus and form a complex. A free H plus combines with the buffer to form a weak acid that can either remain as an unassociated molecule or dissociate back to the buffer and H plus. And when H plus concentration is high, the reaction is forced. So when the H plus concentration it is very high, so the reaction will be forced to the right side as long as the buffer is available. When conversely, when the H plus concentration is less, so reaction will be shifted to the left, and we know that this reaction will be shifted to the left and more dissociation of H plus will take place. So when the H plus concentration is high, it will be shifted to the right. When the H plus concentration is less, it will be shifted to the left. So in our body, we know that the H plus concentration is very less. We know that it is around, at neutral pH, it is around 10 to the power minus 7 mole. So we can say it is 0.00004 milliequivalent per liter. But how much non-volatile acids are formed? It is 80 milliequivalent. So body is trying to control the pH, trying to keep the pH within 7.4 to 7.3 to 7.4, and the H plus concentration it is trying to keep within the level of 0.00004 milliequivalent per liter. But the metabolism is producing 80 milliequivalent per liter of non-volatile acids. So in order to preserve the pH, in order to maintain our enzymatic functions and keeping all H plus concentration within this normal limit, the buffer system should act. So this buffer system, we know with the help of Henderson-Hasselbalch reaction, suppose this is the buffer HA and H plus A. So Ka is equal to concentration of H into concentration of A minus divided by concentration of HA. So from this we can have the H plus concentration, that is K into HA divided by A minus. Okay, so we can take the logarithm of this and we are getting log K plus log HA divided by A minus, and we know the negative logarithm of both the sides, where negative logarithm is the pH, so we will get the pK plus log A minus divided by HA. So this is our Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. From it we can get the pK value of all the buffers, which is very important. Why it is important? Because it is seen that if the constant buffer, the buffer is most effective when the concentration of weak acid and its salt are equal. So when this A plus and HA, they are equal, that is that their ratio is 1, so log 1 is equal to 0, that means pH is equal to pK. So when the buffer is maximum effective, when the pH value it is equal to pK. So we know the pH value of our blood body system. It is around 7.3 to 7.4. Okay. So now we will see what are the buffers that is present in our system. We will analyze their pK value so that we can identify which buffer system is most important, optimum for our maintenance of pH of our body. So inside our body, in the extracellular fluid, the most important buffer system is the bicarbonate buffer system. We also have the plasma protein, protein buffer system, which has got both the intracellular and extracellular fluid buffering activity. Among the protein buffer system, we have the plasma protein buffer, we have the hemoglobin buffer, and some amino acid buffers are also there. For intracellular buffer, the phosphate buffer system is very important. Now first is the plasma protein buffers. These plasma proteins are effective, very effective both for extracellular and intracellular fluid, because both their free carbonyl and the free amino acid group, they dissociate. We can see the carbonyl and the amino acid group, they can dissociate, and they can prove a very effective buffer, especially for the intracellular fluid. Now another important buffer is the hemoglobin buffer. The second buffer system, it is very important because this is the structure of hemoglobin. We can see the heme molecule. The centrally we have the iron, and the iron with its forehand, it has the pyrrole ring at its forehand, and with the other hand it binds with the oxygen, and there is in the globin it binds with the proximal histidine of the protein. So this is the plane for the porphyrin ring, and this is a plane for the histidine residue. So these histidine residues are very important in case of hemoglobin. So we will see that the imidazole group of this histidine residue of hemoglobin, they can act they can dissociate and act as effective buffer. But if we consider the pK value of this hemoglobin buffer, we may see that this dissociation of this imidazole group, it is not much effective at the pH range of 7 to 7.47. But we know that our body pH is almost 7.4. So how this hemoglobin buffer is acting here? But although the pK value, there is a difference between the body pH and the pK value of the hemoglobin buffer, but it is very important buffer in our system, as the amount of hemoglobin, it is very large in our body, and it has got 38 histidine residues. So histidine residues number are more. That's why it can give a considerable contribution in the buffering system of our body. So now the third buffer, that is a bicarbonate buffer. You will see that it is used by the respiratory buffering system, the blood buffering, and the renal buffering. Renal system also uses the phosphate and ammonia buffer. But among them, this bicarbonate buffer is very much powerful, very much essential for the maintenance of pH of the extracellular fluid. Now, why? So why the bicarbonate buffer is so important? So this is a bicarbonate buffering system. We can derive the pK value from it. We can see if we take the negative logarithm. So one point is important here, that this HCO3 minus. So ideally the H plus is equal to K into the H2CO3 divided by HCO3 minus. Here there should be HCO3 minus, H2CO3 divided by HCO3 minus. This should be the actual equation. Okay, but here we have replaced the value of H2CO3 with CO2, partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Why we have done this? Because the measurement of H2CO3, it is very difficult. Okay, so and its value is hard to measure the H2CO3 level accurately. So now in the body, this H2CO3, it is in equilibrium with carbon dioxide. Okay, so we can, and we know that the dissolved carbon dioxide, it is proportional to the partial pressure of CO2, and the solubility coefficient of carbon dioxide in millimole per liter per mm, it is equal to 0.03. That's why we have replaced the H2CO3 with the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and we have made a correction with it, that is 0.03 into the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And by doing this, we are getting this equation, this final equation, where we will get a value of pK, that is 6.1. Okay, so what is our body pH, the extracellular fluid pH? It is around 7.4. So it is much less than the body pH of 7.4. And we know that if the pH value is equal to the pK value, then only the pH buffer system is the most effective, or the optimum buffer system. So in spite of the fact that the pK value is much less than the body pH, extracellular fluid pH, how this bicarbonate system, it becomes the most powerful system in our body. So why bicarbonate is so powerful? So because here the HCO3 minus and the partial pressure of CO2. So in the equation, the numerator and denominator, this HCO3 minus and CO2, partial pressure of CO2, they are very closely regulated by kidney and the lung. And as a result, the pH of extracellular fluid, it is precisely controlled. So whenever there is any change of pH, the lung will try to either remove the carbon dioxide or retain the carbon dioxide to restore the pH change. Or if there is any change in the pH, the kidney will try to remove the HCO3 minus or retain the HCO3 minus in order to restore the pH. So HCO3 minus and carbon dioxide, they are very closely regulated by kidneys and lung, and that is the reason why the bicarbonate buffer is very useful in our body. There are other two additional reasons that make the carbonic acid bicarbonate system a good biological buffer. One is this reaction, carbon dioxide and H2 and H2CO3, it proceeds slowly in either direction unless the enzyme carbonic anhydrase is present. So there is no carbonic anhydrase in the plasma, but there is abundant supply in red blood cells, especially containing and controlling the reaction. Second, the presence of hemoglobin in blood increases the buffering of the system by binding free H+ produced by the hydration of carbon dioxide and allowing for movement of HCO3- into the plasma. Now, renal buffering system, we already know it is extremely important. One, it regulates pH by reabsorption of filtered bicarbonate, or when the filtered bicarbonate, when the secreted H+ is binds with other buffer system like phosphate and ammonia buffer, there will be generation of new bicarbonate. And this is in a nutshell, when there is in a condition when there is acidosis, so there is more H+ is added in our body, so H+ will be converted, so H+ H2CO3, it will form the carbon dioxide and H2O, and this carbon dioxide will be, the lung will try to exhale out this, wash out this carbon dioxide. And similarly, when HCO3-, so in the bicarbonate reserve will be there, so the kidney will try to conserve more HCO3-, so there will be secretion of H+, and there will be retention of HCO3 minus. All of them will try to restore the pH of the extracellular fluid. Now the abnormalities associated with acid-base balance. So we know the pH is 7.4. So if pH is less than that, that is the acidosis. If it is more than that, then it is alkalosis. The acidosis can be of two types. One is the respiratory acidosis, when the cause is there is retention of carbon dioxide is the cause. When the carbon dioxide concentration, partial pressure is high, so that is giving rise to acidosis. But another condition, when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, it is almost normal, but when the HCO3 minus concentration, it is less. When the HCO3 minus concentration is less or body accumulates more H plus, that is the condition is the metabolic acidosis. So similarly, when the pH is more than 7.4, then it is alkalosis. This alkalosis can be of two variety. One is the respiratory alkalosis, when there is PCO2 washout is there, so less partial pressure of carbon dioxide, so then it is denoted as the respiratory alkalosis. Or somehow when the bicarbonate accumulation is more, then that is the metabolic acidosis. So what are the characteristics of acid-base disturbances? So these are the three parameters we first look into it in order to diagnose whether it is acidosis or alkalosis, and if acidosis, what type of acidosis, respiratory or metabolic. If alkalosis, it is respiratory alkalosis or metabolic acidosis. So first thing that we'll look into is the pH. If pH is less than 7.4, then it is acidosis, maybe respiratory or metabolic. If pH is more than 7.4, then it is alkalosis. Okay. So when we know that it is acidosis, then we will look for two things. First, we will look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. If the patient is suffering from acidosis and its partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high, that means it is respiratory acidosis and bicarbonate concentration is normal. Whereas we will look that pH level is less, that means patient is suffering from acidosis, but the PCO2 level is normal, so nothing to do with the respiration, but the bicarbonate level is less, then it is acidosis and the type is the metabolic acidosis. Okay. Now come to the condition when the pH is more than 7.4, so that is alkalosis. So first we'll look at the pH. The second point, we'll look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. If the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, it is less, we know the normal pressure is 40 millimeter of mercury. If it is less, then we will call it, the main cause is the related to respiration, so it is respiratory alkalosis. Now if the partial pressure of carbon dioxide it is normal, then we will go and look for the bicarbonate concentration. If the bicarbonate concentration is high, then it is metabolic alkalosis. So this is very simple situation. Now our body will try to compensate. We know the compensatory mechanism is respiratory acidosis is there, so the kidney will try to compensate. If the metabolic acidosis is there, then the respiratory system will try to compensate. So we will may not get this simple type of parameters. So the parameters may be like this. So we have to look at the pH first. So pH, if it is less, then it is acidosis, then it may be metabolic or may respiratory. Now you have to look for the carbon dioxide, partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So here we can see that the level it is high. Okay, so pH is less and PCO2 is high, so it is a respiratory acidosis. But you look at the HCO3 minus, its concentration is high, that means kidney is trying to excrete more H plus and increase the HCO3 minus reabsorption. So more HCO3 minus retention, that means it can restore the pH. So what will be the compensation of respiratory acidosis? So respiratory acidosis means pH is less and PCO2 is high, and in order to compensate it, the HCO3 level will become high. So both in the same direction, PCO2 is high and HCO3 minus is also high. Now come to a condition when the pH is less, that is acidosis, and PCO, and if we look into the bicarbonate concentration, the bicarbonate is less. So this is a condition of metabolic acidosis. So what will be the compensation? If metabolic acidosis is there, so respiratory lung will try to excrete, wash out more carbon dioxide. So what will be the compensation? At the end of compensation, you can see that partial pressure of carbon dioxide, it is reduced. So metabolic acidosis, when it is compensated, so we will have less pH, less bicarbonate and less PCO2. Okay, and if this compensation is good enough, then the pH will be restored. Now come to condition where the pH is high, that is the alkalosis. So if we will look at the PCO2 value, so PCO2 is also less, so less carbon dioxide, that is causing the alkalosis. So this is a respiratory alkalosis. How the kidney will respond to it? It will try to increase the bicarbonate secretion. So more bicarbonate secretion, so bicarbonate concentration will be less. So in respiratory alkalosis, that is compensated, is trying to compensate, the pH is high and PCO2 and bicarbonate both will be reduced. Now similarly in metabolic alkalosis, we know the pH will be high, and the main cause of high pH is high bicarbonate concentration, and how our respiratory system will try to compensate, it will cause the hypoventilation. So there will be retention of partial pressure of carbon dioxide, so carbon dioxide partial pressure will be increased. So in the first picture we are seeing a simple condition where the respiratory acidosis and alkalosis or metabolic acidosis and alkalosis just happened, and in the second picture we are seeing how our body is trying to compensate. So in respiratory alkalosis, the kidney will try to compensate, that's why the bicarbonate level will be raised. In metabolic acidosis, our lung will try to compensate, will wash out more carbon dioxide, so PCO2 value will be less. In respiratory alkalosis, again the kidney will try to compensate, so bicarbonate concentration will be low. In metabolic alkalosis, the respiratory system will try to compensate, so PCO2 value will be raised. Now what is the algorithm by which we can go to detect the changes of diagnose the acidosis and alkalosis? So first I told you have to look for the pH. If the pH is less than 7.4, then it is acidosis. Then we have to look for the bicarbonate concentration and partial pressure of carbon dioxide concentration. If carbon dioxide concentration is high and it is acidosis, so it is respiratory acidosis. If the bicarbonate concentration is less, then it is a metabolic acidosis. Okay, so we now look for the compensation, whether it has been taken place or not. So if in case of respiratory acidosis, the renal compensation, if it is there, then there will be increase in bicarbonate concentration. And in case of metabolic acidosis, if the respiratory concentration is there, so there will be decrease in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Similarly, if the pH is more than 7.4, then it is alkalosis. Then we have to look for the PCO2 and bicarbonate concentration. If the PCO2 concentration is less, then it is respiratory alkalosis. If bicarbonate concentration is more, then it is metabolic alkalosis. Now whether compensation has taken place or not, we have to look for the, in case of respiratory alkalosis, if the bicarbonate concentration has been reduced, then renal compensation has been taken place. In case of metabolic alkalosis, if PCO2 value is raised, then respiratory compensation has taken place. So this is a picture in the previous slide we have already discussed. So these are the causes of acidosis and alkalosis. The metabolic acidosis, it can happen in case of diabetic ketoacidosis or in case of NH4Cl ingestion. Metabolic alkalosis can occur due to prolonged vomiting. So prolonged vomiting, so there will be more loss of we can see here the prolonged loss of H plus means there is bicarbonate concentration is high, and there may be due to NaHCO3 ingestion. Now respiratory acidosis means there is accumulation of carbon dioxide, so breathing 7% CO2 or emphysema, or respiratory alkalosis when there is hyperventilation. It may be voluntary hyperventilation or high altitude like this. So these are the causes of acidosis and alkalosis in our body. So the symptoms regarding respiratory acidosis may be the drowsiness and dizziness. Respiratory acidosis means there is accumulation of carbon dioxide, and why there is accumulation of carbon dioxide? Due to respiratory depression. The lung is not functioning, so carbon dioxide washout is inadequate. So accumulation of carbon dioxide, ultimately it will cause drowsiness and dizziness, disorientation, muscle weakness. This is a very fatal condition. There may be headache, there may be arrhythmia, so rapid and shallow respiration. So these are the clinical features of respiratory acidosis. Whereas respiratory alkalosis, which means when there is more carbon dioxide washout, that is hyperventilation. It may occur in anxiety, or in case of mechanical ventilation. The clinical features may be the seizure, it may be the tachycardia, there may be hypokalemia, numbness and tingling of extremities, nausea, vomiting, lightheadedness, lethargy and confusion. The metabolic acidosis, we know that if there is severe diarrhea. So metabolic acidosis, one important cause is there is severe diarrhea, or if there is accumulation of ketoacids, for example in diabetic ketoacidosis. So diarrhea is a cause where there will be metabolic acidosis, or where the kidney is unable to reabsorb the bicarbonate. So more bicarbonate loss, one maybe the loss in the through the GI tract, or maybe the loss may be through the kidney. So there will be metabolic acidosis, or it may be due to diabetic ketoacidosis. Regarding the clinical features, so causes are diabetic ketoacidosis, severe diarrhea, renal failure, shock. So then metabolic acidosis, headache, decreased blood pressure, hyperkalemia, muscle twitching. There will be warm, flushed skin, nausea, vomiting. The level of consciousness will change, Kushmal's breathing or compensatory hyperventilation will be there. And metabolic alkalosis, we can see the alkalosis, that means there is severe vomiting, persistent, prolonged, severe vomiting. Diarrhea is going to cause metabolic acidosis, whereas persistent vomiting means we know that in the GI tract there is formation of HCl, so more loss of HCl, so that is a reason of metabolic alkalosis. So in addition to that, the so many other causes like steroid use and the thiazide diuretics, they can also cause the metabolic alkalosis. And the clinical features will be restlessness, arrhythmia, compensatory hypoventilation, confusion, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, tremor, muscle cramps, hypokalemia, etc. Now regarding the treatment of acid-base disorder, it should always address the underlying cause. If it is due to diarrhea, then treat the diarrhea. If it is due to vomiting, treat the vomiting. If it is due to diabetic ketoacidosis, treat the diabetes. So some steps is urgently, so in order to, there are certain emergency steps we have to take. So in case of respiratory acidosis, means there is accumulation of carbon dioxide, so treatment of COPD or the respiratory depression may be due to intoxication of opioids. So many sedative drugs, they may cause depression of respiratory center and cause the accumulation of carbon dioxide. So we have to treat those causes, benzodiazepine. Then we can also in case of respiratory alkalosis, also hyperventilation treatment syndrome should be treated. In case of metabolic acidosis, we know that acute severe metabolic acidosis, the intravenous sodium bicarbonate should be given. And in case of chronic metabolic acidosis, oral sodium bicarbonate along with treatment of the underlying cause, that is a diarrhea, renal tubular acidosis. Electrolyte disturbances should be corrected. If there is hypokalemia, hyperkalemia, that should be corrected. Management of diabetic ketoacidosis should be done. In case of metabolic alkalosis, volume depletion, that is isotonic saline should be given in order to increase the volume to correct the extracellular volume loss. Bicarbonate excess can be treated by giving acetazolamide. Electrolyte disturbances should be corrected. Now one important point here I want to mention. We already know that how we are going to diagnose the acidosis or alkalosis. Suppose this is a case of acidosis, low pH. We know the second thing that we'll look into the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. If the partial pressure of carbon dioxide it is high, then it is respiratory acidosis. If it is low and the bicarbonate, then we'll look for the bicarbonate concentration. If the bicarbonate concentration it is low, then it is metabolic acidosis. Okay, and the bicarbonate concentration it may be high in respiratory acidosis. Okay. So we know now the condition may not remain that much simple. So there will be some compensation. Okay. So there will be some compensation in case of metabolic acidosis. The compensation should be via respiratory system. So what will be the respiratory response? So we know that here the bicarbonate concentration is high. So there will be more carbon dioxide washout. So PaCO2 value should be reduced. Okay, so decrease in the PaCO2 value will be my compensatory response. Now we have to look for the fact whether this decrease in PaCO2 it is within the limit, within the expected range, or it is more, or it has not been reduced. This is a two important thing we have to notice. So if the decrease in PaCO2 it is as expected, how much is expected? From this we know that the expected PaCO2 we can get from this formula, that is 1.5 into bicarbonate plus 8. Okay, so if we know the bicarbonate level, we can expect that how much should be the partial pressure of carbon dioxide level. So that is the compensation of metabolic acidosis. How much should be the decrease in the PaCO2 level? If it is within the range, then it is metabolic acidosis with respiratory compensation. Now if decrease is much more than the expected, then the condition is not only the compensation, there may be a mixed condition, that is a metabolic acidosis plus respiratory alkalosis. This mixture is there. And if the decrease is not done, it is not decreased, or the decrease is less than the expected value, then we will call it the metabolic acidosis with respiratory acidosis. So this is a mixed acidic disorder. So first, whether the pH is high and low. If it is high, if it is low, then we look for PaCO2 and bicarbonate. If it is due to bicarbonate low and we diagnose it as a metabolic acidosis, then we'll look for whether the respiratory compensation has taken place or not. So decrease in PaCO2 value within the expected range or not. If it is expected, then metabolic acidosis with respiratory compensation. If there is more reduction of PaCO2 than the expected value, then there is certain other things are also playing. So that is metabolic acidosis plus respiratory alkalosis. And if the reduction of PaCO2 it is not as expected, then it is a mixed acid based disorder, that is metabolic acidosis plus respiratory acidosis. Okay. Similarly, in case of respiratory acidosis, we know that renal compensation will take place. There will be increase in bicarbonate concentration. If this increase in bicarbonate concentration within range, within the expected value, how much is expected? For every 10 millimeter increase in the PaCO2, the HCO2 increase by 1 milli equivalent per liter. Okay, so if it is respiratory acidosis, means PaCO2 level is increased, so bicarbonate will be retained. For every 10 millimeter increase in PaCO2, bicarbonate increase will be 1 milli equivalent per liter. So if it is within this expected range, we can say it is respiratory acidosis with renal compensation. But if this increase is beyond the range, it is more than the expected value, then it is respiratory acidosis plus metabolic alkalosis. Or if this increase in bicarbonate it is below the expected range, then it is a mixed disorder, that is respiratory acidosis and metabolic acidosis. Respiratory acidosis and metabolic acidosis. So these two are important. You can see that these are the mixed disorder. So respiratory acidosis and metabolic acidosis, respiratory acidosis and metabolic alkalosis. So similarly, we can also derive when the pH is high. Okay, so whether it is the metabolic alkalosis with respiratory compensation, or it is a mixed disorder like this. And there are expected values here mentioned, how much change of bicarbonate and the PCO2 will occur in case of renal and respiratory compensations. Now come to this important graph. A convenient way to diagnose the acid-base disorder is to use the acid-base normogram. This diagram can be used to determine the type of acidosis or alkalosis as well as its severity. So in this acid-base diagram, we can see that along the x-axis we have plotted the pH value, along the y-axis we have plotted the concentration of bicarbonate, and obliquely, so this is the obliquely, we have plotted the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So here we can say if the pH is 7.4 and the bicarbonate concentration is 24 milli equivalent, and when the partial pressure of PCO2 it is around 40 millimeter of mercury, so it is denoting this central part. Okay, so in this acid-base diagram, pH, bicarbonate concentration and PCO2 values, they intersect according to the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. So the central open circle, it shows the normal values. Now what about these shaded areas? So we can see these shaded areas here. Those shaded areas show the 95% confidence limit of the normal compensations to simple metabolic and respiratory disorders. So when using this diagram, one must assume that sufficient time has elapsed for a full compensatory response. So compensation, it will take some time. But how much time? 6 to 12 hours for ventilatory or respiratory compensations in primary metabolic disorders, and 3 to 5 days for metabolic compensation in case of primary respiratory disorders. Now, if a value is within the shaded area, this suggests that there is a simple acid-base disturbances. So conversely, if the value of pH, HCO3 minus or PCO2, it lie outside the shaded area, this suggests that the patient may have a mixed acid-base disorder. Mixed means there is respiratory acidosis, metabolic acidosis like this, or respiratory alkalosis, metabolic alkalosis. These are the mixed disorders, not the compensatory. So for example, we can take one example. Suppose the pH is 7.3. Say this is the pH is 7.3 and bicarbonate is 12. So this is the bicarbonate, pH is 7.3, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide, it is 25. 25 minus 25 is this thing. So it is this area. So this condition, it is talking about the metabolic acidosis with respiratory compensation. So metabolic acidosis with respiratory compensation. Now another important term, that is the anion gap. The definition of anion gap is that the concentration of anions and cations in the plasma, it is same. It must be equal to maintain the electrical neutrality. So therefore, there is no anion gap in the plasma. However, certain cations and anions are routinely measured. For example, the sodium, and for anions it is chloride and bicarbonate. So anion gap is the difference between the measured cations and the measured anions. So this we can measure the Na plus, and we can measure the bicarbonate and chloride. So the unmeasured anions, so that is giving the idea of anion gap. The unmeasured part may be the protein, it may be the phosphate, citrate and sulfate. So anion gap will increase if the unmeasured anions rise, and most important unmeasured anion, I told you, it may be the albumin, it may be phosphate, sulfate and other organic anions or acids. The measurement of anion gap is especially important to diagnose the metabolic acidosis, the causes of metabolic acidosis. So first picture A is the normal condition where we can see the amount of anion gap. This is anion gap, and we know the amount of bicarbonate and the chloride. This is a normal ion distribution. So there may be a condition where there is metabolic acidosis due to loss of bicarbonate. Metabolic acidosis may be due to loss of bicarbonate or maybe due to accumulation of H+. Okay, so when there is loss of bicarbonate, that is the condition C, we can see the bicarbonate level, it is very much reduced. But look at the anion gap. This anion gap is almost same. So condition C is a disease where the metabolic acidosis is there with a normal anion gap. It may be seen when there is increased bicarbonate loss. Condition B, here it is also a condition of metabolic acidosis, but this acidosis, it is due to H+ accumulation. So you can see here the HCO3 minus level, it is normal, but here the anion gap is very much increased because H+ accumulation in the form other than HCO3 minus H2CO3, we have so many other acids. It may be the lactic acid, it may be the keto acid. So there is accumulation of H+, and these organic anions we cannot measure, so unmeasured anion is increased, so anion gap is increased. So we can have metabolic acidosis with normal anion gap, we can have metabolic acidosis with high anion gap. We have to know the types of this metabolic acidosis because treatment protocol will be totally different because the disease that is causing them, one is due to the H+ accumulation, another is due to bicarbonate loss, so the treatment protocol will differ. So metabolic acidosis, if we diagnose a case, we have to look for anion gap, whether it is a metabolic acidosis with normal anion gap or metabolic acidosis with increased anion gap. So these are the conditions where we can see the metabolic acidosis. This is a metabolic acidosis condition where the serum anion gap, it is anion gap is increased. This is a condition where the serum anion gap is increased. It is due to lactic acidosis or diabetic ketoacidosis is the cause. Okay. So anion gap may be decreased in case of loss of albumin, but most importantly, this is clinically very important, metabolic acidosis with increased anion gap. That means there is accumulation of other organic acids like keto acids or lactic acids, and we have to treat that. Now the metabolic acidosis with normal anion gap, it is due to the bicarbonate related to some this condition is the C condition, bicarbonate loss. It is due to bicarbonate loss. It is also known as hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. So we can see the chloride level is also increased here. Okay, so bicarbonate level is reduced and chloride level is increased. So this condition is also known as hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. How this can happen? Bicarbonate loss, how it is possible? It may be due to gastrointestinal loss. There is a severe diarrhea, prolonged persistent diarrhea, bicarbonate loss, or it may be due to loss through the kidney. Some diseases like renal tubular acidosis. In case of proximal, it may be proximal renal tubular acidosis or distal renal tubular acidosis. They will be unable, kidney will be unable to retain the bicarbonate, to retain or reabsorb the bicarbonate. So in those cases, there will be bicarbonate loss and there will be hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. If the hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, it is due to gastrointestinal loss, then the treatment will be different in case of diarrhea. So if it is due to renal tubular loss, then the treatment will be different. Now again, if it is metabolic acidosis with normal anion gap, how we are going to diagnose this again? So first we diagnose the metabolic acidosis. Second point, whether the anion gap is normal or anion gap is increased. In case of normal anion gap is increased, it may be diabetic ketoacidosis, lactic acidosis, treatment will be different. If the anion gap is normal, then it is the hyperchloremic type. It may be due to the HCO3 minus loss. It may be the GI loss, it may be the kidney loss. How can we diagnose that? Then we can measure the urinary anion gap. So if the urine anion gap it is raised, then we can say that it is due to the GI loss. Okay, so we will treat accordingly. If the urine anion gap it is decreased, then we will call it is due to the renal tubular acidosis. Thank you.